Okay, we're live.
We're live. We're live. Okay. Aha.
I hope we're live. That's weird. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Frank and Dogs and Baskets. And Dogs and Baskets is a podcast about ideologies. And the name comes from an ultimate Frisbee reference where the ideology of ultimate Frisbee has led to a phenomena where after 50 years, when an ultimate Frisbee player mentions ultimate to a stranger, they get one of two questions 99 out of 100 times. And this has been going on for 50 years. Oh, is that the thing with the dogs or is that the thing with the baskets? Ultimate players hate this, and yet it's the ideology that they love so much that's led to this phenomena. I'm joined today again with Matthew Ehret, a heretical historian. Matthew has been working for years looking at history over the last several hundred years, connecting dots in people in places where people don't even see dots. He's done a lot of investigative work behind the scenes over the last several hundred years and has a fascinating background on a great many issues. He's a fascinating man to talk to, and I'm bringing him on today to talk about the ideology and ultimate.
Just to clarify, I have not been studying for several hundred years, so that would be awesome. But I do try to carry around several hundred years of history in my head whenever possible, in a utility belt.
Mm-hmm. At least not in this lifetime.
Not in this lifetime, exactly.
Right. So in our last conversation, we spoke about Plato's cave, ideologies, and I've always thought that ultimate Frisbee is a great case study for ideologies because it gives us a concrete, real world, tangible example that doesn't involve religions or politics or other inflammatory things that ends up in fistfights normally. And ideologies, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is sort of where I'm going with this. And I'm very careful not to be against any specific ideologies, but ideologies to me are shackles represented in the allegory of the cave that, they ideologies tend to incarcerate us. And certainly Buddha spoke at length about liberation, moksha, freeing ourselves from the shackles that bind us. Jesus spoke about liberation and salvation. Muhammad, now this is very interesting, and this is where we can start tweaking the ideologies a little bit and saying, oh, if we look at it, just tilt the perspective a little bit. Now, Muhammad spoke about death to the infidels and jihad. And if we tweak these two little things to maybe see them in a way that's consistent with these others, it makes things a little interesting. So if we ask the question, is death to the infidels, is that possibly death to the ego? Is that a way to say, okay, well, that's very interesting, and that's actually more consistent with these other things? And then if you look at jihad, which the word jihad simply means conflict, if you look at jihad as the inner struggle, the inner conflict every human has between our animalistic self and our higher divine, the divinity within us, again, that's very much consistent with all these. And in that context, again, Muhammad's talking about liberation and breaking us free of these ideologies. Fascinating, right? How many people have been killed because of, I mean, hypothetically, but it sounds, you hear this like, oh, wow, that actually sounds, that sounds reasonable. How many people have died at the result of a slight misinterpretation error of these ideologies? But all, again, my assertion is that ideologies bind us, and rather than being against ideologies, I'm just hoping to be able to point them out. And again, we can use this ideology and Frisbee to kind of say, okay, that's interesting. That's look at how each one of these things binds us to a specific belief, and an ideology is like a belief structure. It's a whole package of a lot of beliefs that all kind of carry with them, usually a self-referential circular logic that incarcerates. Okay.
I think just to add to that, as an idea that sprung into my mind just listening to you, I was thinking a little bit about the idea of a formal equation and the thing that brought it into being. So oftentimes we're given in school a formal equation that we're told to memorize and use when we have certain problems we encounter in symbolic mathematical, language. And the point of math is to just, you always want to make this side equal this side and make it balance. And you got to, there's certain tools to solve a problem. Now that's useful, but it gets really bad. It gets kind of, I guess I would call it ideological when you stop thinking about what were the powers of creative thought that occurred, which made this equation, which at one point did not exist as something to use, right? It wasn't a discovery, whether it's the Pythagorean theorem or whether it's the inverse square law, whatever. It didn't exist. Somebody had a great discovery, found a way to communicate it by wrapping it in a symbolic language to communicate to other minds that could then use it. But if you don't reproduce the quality of the original mind, that original eureka, it becomes just an ideology. I believe it's true. Why is it true? It's true because it works. That's totally circular logic. That's not sufficient reason, right? That's not like, if you care about the truth, that shouldn't satisfy you, which is why a lot of students don't do well in math class. The ones that do well usually are not using their mind. They're just using their memory. So I think it's like that with, in the Bible, there's points where there's the warning that, one should not lose the spirit in favor of just the word. So it's when you start using, well, why is it true? Because Jesus said. Well, that's not exactly sufficient. That's somewhat circular too. It's true. The fact that Jesus said it says something about Jesus's wisdom, that, mercy, turning in the other cheek is better than vengeance. Okay. But think it through a little bit more. So it's not an ideology anymore, right? You're owning it. And it's a spirit. So the spirit of the creative force that brought the rule into being is what is animating you, and not the rule itself as something that replaces your own power of thought. And I think you'll find that in Islam, in Buddhism, you'll find it everywhere. This tendency to want to take things that came out of a creative process, turn them into formal, crystallized things, and just basically have it think for us, right? Have the rule think for us, which then causes us to hate creativity. So whenever somebody then comes up with a new idea that is creative, we feel challenged by it or threatened by it, which should not be what we feel. We should feel like, wow, great. A student is asking a professor a difficult question that the professor doesn't have the answer to. Wonderful should be the answer, not sit down, get out, or something, whatever, like whatever hostility creative people encounter.
That's fucking brilliant. And you encapsulated my experience. Part of the challenge of using this as a case study is there's no reference frame to say, look what Ultimate should have been. You can look up YouTube. And by the way, what's your knowledge of Ultimate Frisbee? I hope it's zero.
It's not zero, but it's pretty close. Great. I gotta say,
perfect.
I feel like I'm going to be learning a lot about the sport by you. I don't know anything.
Excellent. That's better. That's really great, because you have exactly what you just described, which is that fresh perspective. And there's no way for me that you can turn on videos and watch, all kinds of stuff on YouTube. It's on ESPN, blah, 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 and some qualifiers there. But it looks very polished and when it's on the right media. Nobody watches it, basically, other than players. And
no, I think I saw an episode I saw a bit at a bar once.
Yeah.
That's my only experience of Ultimate Frisbee is having a drink and looking over my shoulder and saying, Frisbee.
There it is.
That was it.
Oh, Dogs and Baskets. Where's the basket? Where's those damn baskets? Great. So back to what you were saying, I was I became a heretic. I started playing in the late 70s, and I played for 10 years, just the conventional Orthodox, and I broke free from that. And I developed a whole system that should have forced the rules to be overhauled. And it's funny how you mentioned Jesus and Bible and rules, because what you described is exactly what happened here. Nobody in Ultimate understands the pedigree or the genesis, why the rules are the way they are. And that whole entire creative process of oh, why is this? And I can even get into the idiosyncrasies of them because you don't know the game, and that's fine. I'll do that with an ultimate player soon after this and break those down separately. But like ultimate player, it's exactly what you said. Everything is kind of crystallized around these concepts. So, well, these are the rules. Well, of course, this is what they are. And like I said, I've developed a system that should have forced the rules to be completely overhauled. I broke the game. And that's just, and yet that was 30 years ago and the game still goes on.
Sorry, just quick. Were you playing professionally? Or what how did you encounter and perform in that world?
It's only become professional in the last, I mean, there's been 3 professional leagues. There's an Major League Ultimate once back 20 years ago, and then Major League Ultimate 12 years ago. And now there's American Ultimate Disc League. That's been in play for about 10 years. I probably could still play professionally because the system that I bring to the table gives so much leverage. It breaks the game. And it gives me so much leverage that a 61-year-old dude can go out and actually dominate. And of course, the whole ultimate community is going to be up in arms. How Frank, this guy is an egomaniac, narcissist, blah, blah, blah. No, your game is dumb. And you don't know it because you're stuck in this ideology. I mean, your description of, what you said a few minutes ago just was like, holy crap, that's it. Like you nailed it. And why this game just trudges on and it's crystallized into this entity where it doesn't change. And you've got a creative person who gets attacked because, wait a second, you're violating our belief system. That's, we either have to accept this or accept this, but there's cognitive dissonance between the two things is insurmountable. So
will it be too difficult if I were to ask you what was this revolutionary new approach to the game that you were able to bring into being and what you saw as the problem, or is that too much to unpack?
No, that's fine. That's perfect. How do I want to keep this tight. The game was, you look at it on paper, you look at the field, it looks like a football field. And the creator, there was 2 main creators, Joel Silver, who's a big Hollywood producer. He did the Matrix films, Lethal Weapon series, a bunch of other really huge films. Found a game like this in summer camp in 1968, brought it back to Columbia High School, Maplewood, New Jersey, started a club. It was all kind of a mock club and a mock sport. Like they were just kind of laughing, but he went through the process with the school board or the high school principal, whatever he needed to do to get an official team game. And then, and him and Johnny Hines and Buzzy Hellring were the first sort of, they were the people who were managing the rules for a couple of years. And then a gentleman by the name of Irv Kalb, who I played with back in the early 80s, was the progenitor of the rules. He owned the rules throughout the whole 70s, and he's the one who really codified them and made the game what it was. And Irv had been playing a lot of flag football at the time. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, we played tackle, but you know what I'm saying? And that's important to understand. And that goes exactly back to what you were saying about people tend to forget the genesis of the ideology and detach from it. And it's really important to understand that Irv was playing flag football. What does that mean? Because that means something to me, being from the Midwest and playing tackle. So, there's that's a value that has value and understanding. So it's a big field, and the rules are a lot like football, and they're more like football than people even realize. Mm-hmm. But he also meshed in a lot of rules from basketball, and each of those frameworks, the football framework and the basketball framework, have a wholly different set of guardrails. You know, in football, you've got 4 downs to do something, and if you go out of bounds, you lose a quarter of that 4 downs, and you get to try again. You get 4 attempts to do something. All the penalties and the rules are oriented around that framework of a downs-based system.
Okay.
It's a square wave sport. You know, you do it. It's a play-based sport. You run a play, everybody stops. You know, baseball is a play-based sport. You run a play stops. Volleyball. It's tennis. You know, you do something, you stop, you do something, you stop. Basketball and soccer and other sports are possession based. They're fluid. The sport keeps going on and on.
Rugby.
And on.
Yeah.
And so the frameworks for those have guardrails and frameworks associated with those things. Ultimate meshes the guardrails of both, and in the process, this almost has no guardrails. What I did was bring in the concept of dribbling into Ultimate, and dribbling is it's in soccer, it's in hockey, it's in lacrosse in the form of cradling, it's in basketball, of course. So dribbling is just the concept of moving around the playing field with the game object. What's the, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what's the primary guardrail in American football, whether it's traditional or whether it's flag or whether it's touch football? It's tackling.
Oh.
Tackling is the prime. If the whole game is built around, I mean, that's the guardrail. Boom, you get that.
I was always a fragile art student. I did 2-hand touch.
So tackling is that's a hard boundary right there. You get put on your ass. That's a boundary.
Yes.
Ultimate doesn't have that bound. Like that guardrail has been completely removed from Ultimate. So if you bring in dribbling, if you bring in this concept, this philosophy, this technique that allows you to take a sport that's based on play, stop, play, stop, play, stop, which Ultimate is, and people will debate this, but it's true. And you come up with a system where you just keep moving around, it breaks the game. So dribbling is the answer to your question, but I had to set it up with an explanation of why why that is. But it wrecks the sport. The rules they need to be overhauled. There's no way Irv Kalb or Joel Silver had any, they didn't have any business inventing a sport, but they certainly didn't have any idea of the idea of dribbling and what it would do to their game.
Okay.
But it's the ideology, like you said, in this fresh idea and creativity, being confronted with this crystallized hive mind. That so without any further ado, I've got here the first 3 paragraphs of the rules. Now I just looked online. And the rules, the governing body for the game in the United States just now, I don't know if they've got a new revision of the rules, but they redid this. They made it even more ideological. Which I guess you'll see in a minute.
Okay.
Right. How is that possible? But it is. Sure. But what I'd like to do in this experiment is read these sentences, and I'm going to maybe just break down into segments. Some of these sentences, there will be 2 or 3 different stoppages, and I'll just ask you, hey, what do you see there? And there may be nothing, or but after we get through it, hopefully you'll have some observations as a whole of what this is.
Okay.
All right. The official rules of Ultimate 11th edition describes how the game is played. Specifically, I have in highlights how the game is played. Said.
Are you asking me? What are you asking me now?
I'm asking you the how the game is played. Does that belong in the rules? Because let me give a hint here. The way the game has played hasn't changed in 50 years, according to me.
Well, I mean, in my naive view of things, I would say that starting off a rule book with an announcement to the reader saying this is how the game is played seems to be okay, right? No, am I naive?
When we get through, hopefully people can circle back and say, okay, oh, that's interesting. It's just it's pretty benign, but once I get into start like questioning who the hell wrote this, it stands out to me.
Oh, okay. All right.
It to me, it should say something like, here's the rules for, blah, 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 a framework for,
Okay.
playing the game, but how a game is played. Like some people may play basketball this way. Some may play this way. The basketballs don't say how to play. They just give a framework to play the game.
Okay.
All right.
Let's see some examples and maybe it'll add some meat on the bones.
Right. Next, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to start a sentence, and then when I go with the air quotes, that's the part I'll, look for comment on. It is assumed that no player will intentionally violate the rules. Ideological, not ideological.
I mean, it's a weird subjective thing to throw out there. I mean, for a rule book, which is supposed to be just a bunch of objective sets of rules to follow, it's a bit of a weird subjective thing to say, like, hey, we're just going to assume you're not a cheater before getting into anything about what the objective rules are. I guess that's a bit weird.
Okay, good. This is fun. This whole thing might be weird, but thanks for playing along.
Yeah, sure. I'm open for new experiments. So.
I'm a huge fan of, and I don't read, by the way. I'm a little dyslexic, but I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Flies. I get the concepts. I'm like a Cliff Notes guy. Lord of the Flies and Jack, because this whole thing assumes there are no Jacks. Do you know Jack's the archetype?
Is Jack the alpha in?
He's not as intelligent. He's a subversive. He's an alpha, but he's also like Jacks to me are just guys who are that they're going to cheat intentionally.
Okay.
Because that's what alphas do. Like Jacks are the guys who always win. And I never watched this show, but Survivor. I would have been the first person kicked off the island first time. Okay. So, and again, I'm going to start the sentence over again, just to put the first one in context. It is assumed that no player will ever intentionally violate the rules. Thus, there are no harsh penalties for inadvertent actions. Let me read that backwards. I'm going to take those two half.
No, yeah, there's no penalties. They're assuming that no one's going to violate the rules, and so because people they're assuming are all honest brokers, with no bad intentions that exist in their assumed world, they're saying that they won't consider any possible penalties or rules that are created for those who break rules because those people don't exist. Is sort of what they're saying.
Okay, that's what it says. But let me read this. I'm going to transpose the front and back of the sentence.
Okay.
No harsh penalties for inadvertent infractions are going to happen because no players violate the rules intentionally.
Yeah. Okay. They just said that. Okay. That's pretty naive. Yeah.
Well, but wait, that says the only reason for penalties in sports is because people cheat. Is that true?
Oh, no.
No, of course not. That's what this says.
Okay.
See where, and the question is, and this could be subtle, and I'd like to think that, you're going to say something brilliant.
No.
But I know. But the litmus test, the tracers for identifying something ideological is there's always sort of an underlying it's sort of like an assumption. I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. Participation trophies. Someone thought, it's like there's an underlying, this will be good for their self-esteem, or Bobby's getting his feelings hurt because, so there's this underlying assumption, quasi belief that gets put in. So every one of these will have that, and you'll see over going through this that
I guess I see what you're saying now, because I mean, again, I'm not a sports person
right.
in any way. I played bowling. That was my thing, billiards and bowling.
Right. But if you cross the line in bowling, it's a penalty and you didn't do it on purpose. Like,
no, I know. Yeah. Like there's an idea of penalties that have to do with making you better. Like you don't screw up, but the point is you want to excel at something. You want to develop capacities. And when you're too loosey-goosey, you don't develop, you don't grow.
Oh my God, you just fucking nailed. That's everything wrong with Ultimate right there. You nailed it. There's no penalties. Although, interestingly enough, there's not a shot clock, but there's a throw clock. You got 10 seconds to make a play. And if you don't do that, the penalty is a turnover. So wait, okay, so either that's not a harsh penalty or it is, but that's...
What if you punch somebody in the face to grab the Frisbee? Like, is that okay?
We'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
But the question is, the answer is technically yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no, let's continue, because
then I'm surprised that it's not even more popular than it is.
No, it's not, because
a blood sport. I would imagine that it would be already bigger than football.
No, the ideology stops that from happening.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Let's get back. I'm going to read this real quick. It is assumed that no player will intentionally violate rules. Thus, there are no harsh penalties for inadvertent infractions, but rather a method for resuming play in a manner that simulates what would have likely occurred absent the infraction.
Can you repeat that, please?
So this is ideology number 4,
yeah, okay.
or C number 5. Rather, a method for resuming play in a manner that simulates what most likely would have occurred, which most likely would have occurred absent the infraction.
Oh, I see. So you trip the guy, he falls, you stop the game, and then he gets back up, or I guess if he's capable of still walking, and then takes up where you left off the game.
Right. The assumption is, so I run these extraordinarily complex plays. I mean, I don't know if you know basketball. I mean, imagine a play action pass in football, or a pick and roll in basketball, something that's a complex, a lot of moving parts.
You're not going to replace that. Like, you can't replicate that.
Not only can you not replicate, but at what point, how can you resume that in the middle of that? Like, that's impossible.
No, I see what you're saying. And the whole point of the zone, like in sports, I know that athletes often talk about the zone, whether it's Wayne Gretzky being able to visualize the entire playing field, hockey, rink that he's on. Yeah. And he's able to hold this gestalt in his mind and act in the future, right? On states that haven't been there, because he's able to tap into that zone.
I have this theory. Yeah. I do a lot of research on consciousness studies. I'd love to get into it with you on how how atheism as an ideology is untenable, because the results from all these studies, when you look at it, it's just not tenable. The evidence is overwhelming. Maybe next week. And I have this theory in sports. I mean, so what you said about Gretzky, and people are going to, that's how I play. Like, I see 10 things out in front of me ahead, and does it always happen where all 10 of those happen? No, but it does sometimes. Yeah. And I have this theory that when we do things in sports, especially like action sports, where you make a diving catch for a Frisbee, or leap for a baseball or something like that, that we're actually moving backwards in time. Yeah. And we know from our research into human consciousness that, I mean, you've gotten that gut feeling, right before something happens. Mm-hmm. So our consciousness goes out into the future, and that when you're doing something, the mind already gets there before your body does, and sort of pulls your body to make the play. Sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, no, I think that this idea of space-time that you're bringing up is definitely interesting. And certainly when I've read interviews by Michael Jordan as well, who described how when you're in the zone, different athletes in moments of excellence, self-reflecting on what was going on, all sort of describing similar things, like how space-time has slowed down enormously. Everything, it's kind of like, this guy who did the Matrix, probably played with that idea a little bit when he had Neo doing his little, dodging bullets thing. But it is reflective of a real process that it seems everybody who taps into that, and then those who are able to think about it a little bit more are able to. It's not something you can always be in the zone as much as we would like it, but you can accelerate or enhance your ability to get there. And I think that the whoever authored that rule book that just authored that sentence you just read has no conception whatsoever of that, because they treat human beings as if we're just little we're a video game, you know.
It was a 19
rewind, redo it.
It was a 19-year-old nerd from New Jersey. I mean, and I describe it as, to me, defenders are moving in half speed. Like it took me a long time and learning how to dribble in this game. Yeah, I mean, I make dribbling, not me. Dribbling makes a mockery of Ultimate, and once you get there, it's just, and you can get into the zone very easily when dribbling. Okay, so all right, next. So you get that. I mean, that last one's just absurd. That the idea that you can, simulate what might have happened and restart the game is just it's a joke. In Ultimate, an intentional infraction is considered cheating.
In Ultimate, an intentional infraction is considered cheating. An intentional infraction is considered cheating. Well, doesn't that sort of undermine what they had said at the beginning, that we assume that?
No, it's confirming that, but it's sort of backing it up. But when you foul someone in the end of a basketball game, is that cheating? Like it's part of a, you have checks. Part of the framework and the guardrails and balances gives you checks and balances, and it gives you sort of a what's the right word? Gives you a bank account. Okay, I've got 3 more fouls. I can use those. They're, so.
But I don't know. Like, I mean, for me, that's one of those things where they're saying intentional infringements. I guess there's always gray area. Like you're pointing out gray zones that are being overlooked in that statement. I'm sympathetic to the idea of punishing somebody for having an actual bad intention rather than it being an accident. But I see what you're saying, though. I get it.
But you're a bowler. If your foot slides, and what you said is completely is the most profound thing. It'll make you a better bowler. Why? Because if your foot sliding beyond the line, you're not balanced, and if you're not balanced, you're making mistakes, and so that's why there's penalties in sports. It's not to stop cheating; it's to make people better. It's a firm boundary that gives them. I mean, when you're competing, who are you competing with always? It's the same competitor.
Yourself.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the frameworks, and that's not an ideological statement. I hope not, but
no.
But a proper game should give you the ability to do that. And Ultimate Frisbee has never given me that. When you hear the rest of this and you figure out and you see these things in whole, like the thing I just said about, okay, an intentional infraction is considered cheating. Standalone, okay, yeah, maybe in the whole of what. So let me go next. Or no, all
right, but I was going to say, because bowling is, as an individual sport, almost any intentional infraction that I do is going to undermine my gains. Whereas in a group dynamic sport, it's a bit different, because all of a sudden I can get away with undermining somebody else and hoping I don't get caught to advance my own gains. Whereas I can't.
Not at the end of the game. Not in the end of the game in basketball. It's part of the strategy. It's known. Here's what it is. Our team still has 2 fouls to give. We can foul, and they're not going to shoot free throws, and it's going to cost them time because they have to do a side out. That violates. It's a gray area. It's just not always true. It depends on the sport. And Ultimate, is there room for a place where actually an intentional infraction could be strategic? It actually should be, because the guardrails are. Anyway, let me move on, because we're going down. Right. I want to avoid the rat hole.
Philosophical can of worms here that we're.
It gets ideological.
Okay.
And then the next ideological soundbite and is a gross offense against the spirit of sportsmanship. And I'll just continue, because that's sort of the same thing. But to me, don't impose your spirit of sportsmanship on me. That's where it's ideological. Like, no, that's fine. I guess I'm very leery in my life of people shoving their ideology on me. Well, that's your okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll get to, if you figure out okay, often a player is in position to gain an advantage by committing an infraction, but the player is morally bound to abide by the rules. Again, jamming some, who like my morals aren't absolute.
No, well, that should be implicit and not made explicit, I think. If everything else,
right, but it's just we're almost done with the first paragraph.
Yeah, okay,
all right. The integrity of ultimate depends, air quotes, each player's responsibility to uphold the spirit of the game, TM. They trademark the spirit of the game.
Oh, you can do that? Okay.
Well, until they try to sue somebody. I mean, you can get anything trademarked at the USPTO, but if you have to defend it in court, you're going to get crushed.
So but everybody's responsibility to uphold the spirit of the game that's in the rule book. I'm speechless.
Yay! It gets better. It gets better. Trust me.
Go for it.
This is the preface. Then we get to the good stuff.
Okay.
And then the last thing in purple here, this responsibility should remain paramount. Blah blah blah. Okay. Now, I don't know if you remember from your day at the bar and watching the game. So the first paragraph is called the preface. This next one is called the description. Ultimate is a non-contact sport. Is that what you saw on TV? You didn't watch enough to know.
I did have a lot of beer that night, so I don't know. I don't remember. I don't think I saw contact going on though. It did seem to me pretty.
There are violent collisions. There's been God knows thousands of ACL tears and broken collarbones and broken ankles for 40, 50 years. You've got 14 players on a field running full speed going after. I mean, there's a shit ton of contact.
Okay.
To put it in here in the first three sentences, that it's that it's something that it's not is insane. In fact, in high schools across the country, they're prohibited from having co-ed basketball because of the contact. But PE teachers read this and say, "Oh, it's a non-contact sport," and they can have. I mean, it's kind of a joke. Of course, there's a ton of contact in ultimate. It's so. Is there something ideological about defining something to be? It's sort of like, let's label surfing a shark-free sport.
Oh, yeah.
In hopes of no sharks biting, or selling more surfboards, or there's some agenda. Like, why would you say that? It's simply not true.
I mean, I guess if I'll be the devil's advocate here, because
great.
And speaking as somebody who's never played Ultimate Frisbee, what does this mean? What do my words mean? But I mean, what I'm impelled to think is if they set out the game explicitly to be non-contact, like for example, soccer is non-contact. Would you say that
soccer's not non-contact?
But to say that contact happens by and it should happen by accident, isn't that different from saying that it's a contact sport? Because not like football or rugby.
Football and rugby are defined as known to be collision sports.
Yes.
Soccer and basketball are contact sports. It doesn't say in either of the rules for either of those sports that they are non-contact sports, and as such, there's provisions in the rules to help manage the risk-reward ratio. There's nothing in ultimate to provide guardrails to, okay, They can't put in provisions to what happens when a foul happens, because this says fouls don't. I mean, they do happen, but
they made it hard on them. Yeah,
it's created a real issue to have this as built into the rules when it's patently not true.
Yeah.
The rest of the second paragraph actually is, I'll read it off.
Sure.
There's one more thing in here that's just patently wrong. Description: Ultimate is a non-contact team sport played by 2 teams of 7 players. The object of the game is to score goals. A goal is scored when a player catches any legal pass in the end zone that the player is attacking. A player may not run while holding the disc. I highlight that because it's not true. It's a lie.
Oh,
yeah.
Run when you're holding the disc?
Let's see how I can answer this. There's when the game was written, and when these first three paragraphs were written, and just to throw you a curveball, in basketball, you've got 3 steps to stop and plant a pivot foot. In Ultimate Frisbee, depending on which revision of the rules you're playing by, you have to stop as quickly as possible or in as few steps as possible.
So that's pretty liberal. That's pretty wide open. Right? Yeah. Like I couldn't possibly stop below 20 steps.
I did my best, Your Honor. I swear she was 16.
Yeah, no, I can see that's pretty lax. Yeah.
But then in 1995, they amended the rule so that if you're catching and running, if you throw the disc before your third ground contact to another player, that's legal. So this is just factually incorrect. A player may not run while holding the disc. It actually is legal to run while you're holding the disc as long as you throw it within 3 steps. Why they have something in the rules that's just patently wrong is it's probably not ideological, but it's a little insane. It doesn't help when the sport, by the way, I don't know if you know this, the sport's self-refereed. That's part of the spirit of the game.
No.
But we didn't get there.
No.
So it doesn't help when a lot of players, they only read this and I'm running and then they call a traveling violation on me because they think because they read the rules. Well, you can't do that. And it's like, for 25 years, actually, that's legal and you didn't read the rules and The rest of the paragraph are real quick. The disc is advanced by passing it to other players. The disc may be passed in any direction. Anytime a pass is incomplete, a turnover occurs, resulting in an immediate change of direction to the team in possession. Okay, now the next paragraph is entitled The Spirit of the Game. Ultimate relies upon a spirit of sportsmanship that places the responsibility for fair play on the player. So I highlighted for fair play on the player.
Well, that already just adds to what they said about having no referees, that everybody's going to self-referee each other. And thus, isn't that make it implicit what you just said, that thus every individual player has the obligation to sort of is that on no, that doesn't follow from that? I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying like,
right. No, this is different.
Oh,
I like to talk about myself, being the narcissist that I am. Ultimate's not fair the moment I step on the field for anybody else. Basketball's not fair for a 5'1", player. I can go. Sports aren't fair. How is it right? The whole world's not fair. This is a huge ideology.
Nash was a short guy. He excelled in basketball with.
He was 6'2".
Compared to all the 7-footers, it's pretty tiny. But I see what you're saying. 5'1", different story.
You can just take it to extremes. I mean, there was Muggsy. There's a couple really small point guards in the NBA. Muggsy, not Muggsy. Doesn't matter. They exist, but it's not the NFL is not fair on someone your size, whereas you could probably play soccer. Like sports aren't fair; they never were fair.
No, it's a physical game. So yeah, those who have physical attributes are going to excel.
Hold on.
You're going for the mind. You're going for the mind. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah, you're right.
There's all kinds of delineations in athletics. If there weren't, we would just watch track.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking about my Wayne Gretzky example too. Like Gretzky was slower than most of the players in the NHL. I mean, he was not a big guy either. He was like, but it's because he was able to always visualize the future and think of the whole as a moving system that he was able to excel and act in the future. So yeah, that just undermined what I just said about it being physical.
6 years ago, I was trying to teach a team in North Carolina, Ring of Fire from the Raleigh-Durham area. I've been trying to teach this system of mine for 30 years. And of course, you described my dilemma beautifully earlier. And, I had worked out what I thought was agreement where I would, be teaching my system. So one of the days I was there, I'd sat there and watched them for a couple hours, and they did their wind sprints and their stretching and they're scrimmaging, and they were all warmed up and they were ready to go home. I was like, wait a second, I came down here to do this, drove down from Boone, so 6-hour round trip. And so I got like 30 minutes. And the only stretching I did, I was 55 years old at the time. The only stretching I did was to bend over and tie my cleats. So I was totally, compared to these guys are 25, 30 years old, really athletic. It just goes to the Gretzky, what you said about Gretzky. And I completely crushed them. I did what I wanted, how I wanted, when I wanted. There was nothing they can do to stop me. They couldn't understand. There was no reference frame to understand what I did. Well, you're not running hard. I'm sorry. Can I do what I want how I want? Yeah, but so when you said that Gretzky wasn't playing fast, I mean, that's the whole point. The best point guards in the NBA, they're the hardest to cover because they change speed so much. They're, someone who's going the same speed all the time is really easy to cover, but someone who can navigate the speeds. But back to the sports thing, there's a whole wider spectrum of differences between people of what makes one player better than others. It's not just athleticism. Otherwise, we'd be going to a track meet, especially in team sports, and where having field sense and vision, which is completely untangible and unmeasurable, it changes the game. Lawrence Taylor changed football. They named a new position on offense for him, the elephant, because he literally changed the game. There's no game changers in Ultimate because of all this ideology. So Ultimate puts the responsibility for fair play on the player, which, that's highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect among competitors. That's a big one.
Okay. I mean, again, I think that part of this is I'm seeing very cynical views of humankind embedded in the mind of the person trying to project an image of being an optimistic, sort of liberal, happy person, that they really don't think that human beings are ultimately very good or honorable or anything. And so they have to put these little passive aggressive reminders that, or, nudges, like, we expect you to do, we know you'll do good, right? As if they don't believe that you will. And you need to have that explicitly stated. You're
gonna make me start crying.
Why?
Because I've put up with 50 years of this fucking shit.
Oh, okay.
And you just, I mean, what you just said, I mean, what this paragraph does, the spirit of the game, asks me to be someone other than who I am.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't be me, who the fuck am I supposed to be? And it's like, and then, I mean, I'm going to start that little bit over again. Highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect amongst players. And I'm going to break this down even a little bit more. The etymology of the word respect. Re is back, like return or redo. And spect, like spectacles, is to see. Respect, the etymology literally means to look back from the other person's, to be able to see through the other person's eyes. Mutual respect for me on the ultimate field is impossible. No one understands. There's one player on the planet who knows that dribbling destroys the game. That's me. How can someone, so mutual decency would be great, or mutual kindness or cordiality, but mutual, like respect is supposed to be earned, like true respect. Like oh yeah, I have a lot of respect for him. What you can actually see through admiration. You hold him as someone in high self-esteem. Those are great things. That's not respect.
Well, go finish your
thought. We'll break this down in a second. Let me just go.
Well, just on that note, I was just thinking about something I read today on Gateway Pundit, where they did a little coverage of the female soccer team getting their asses kicked by, I think it was Sweden, who, I mean, and it was originally a bit of a shock because they're known as the best team in the world. They've won like 45 consecutive matches. But one of the problems you could see was that there's not a lot of the unity within the team is breaking down. And they had an image of a scandal that arose where many of the players, while you had this 92-year-old guy playing the national anthem on the violin and the American flag was there, several of the players chose to turn away from the flag. Some of them were obviously patriotic. And then there were other pictures of some of them just like kneeling at another occasion when the anthem was being played. I think it was in Mexico, against Mexico. And some of them were very like, I'm a patriot. And so you have this like team that's not a unity. It's at odds with itself morally. There's no, because some of them they obviously don't respect each other for very good reasons in many ways. And so of course they can't accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish on the field when they're now in play.
Ideologically at odds with each other.
Yeah, morally, intellectually, everything. Yeah, it's just, and so how, if you can't even maintain situations of like, obviously respect even amongst one's own team can't be maintained in so many circumstances, how is it that you could just project that onto all teams forever as part of the game? It can't work that way. There's other factors at play that this author of the rulebook is ignoring.
To me, it's like a quota system, and I want to talk about, before we get too much further, I do want to say something about diversity, because in a sense of what you were just talking about, you were talking about diversity in a roundabout way. And I just want to throw this out there that, diversity is not meant to be some egalitarian equality of outcome, equity-based goulash where everybody merges into a single entity and there's no differences. Diversity is meant to say that every single person has something to bring to the table, and it's a celebration and honoring our differences. And yet, how can we honor and celebrate our differences if we're not even going to acknowledge they exist?
Yeah.
Sure. Right. And that's something that's just, and did I say anything ideological just now? I don't think so. And yet all that, what I just said, completely gets lost in the ideology of the people who are embraced in critical theory or indoctrinated in maybe you can speak to this a little bit later or even now, of how critical theory, which was introduced back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, led to this experience where you've got this 97-year-old guy and you've got people not understanding what it is that they're even ideologically up in arms about.
Well, I mean, yeah, not to go into too much, because that's a big segue. So to not derail, I know you want to finish your rule
sometime
book
today,
but yeah, just I guess in the quickest way possible. what you're introducing is critical theory for those who might not be that aware. Although it's becoming, I think people are waking up to this reality. This is something that originated as a theory in the 1930s and 40s by something called the Frankfurt School of Philosophers, who were basically a misanthropic grouping of philosophers who had seen some crazy shit in World War I. They saw humanity doing some pretty terrible stuff, and they essentially concluded that that World War I, the horrors of what was leading up to World War II, were caused by human beings being connected to their traditions, that the traditions of the past, the belief in nationalism, religious adherence, family units, all of these things that connect us as individuals to the past, caused world wars to happen, caused all of the abuses and negative things. And so their cure that they came up with as social psychologists was to come up with a way that would, a system of theories that unfortunately today is very active and dominant in the Western education system and culture more generally, to encourage ways to break society free, especially the young generations born after World War II, who are subjected to increasing doses of this system, that basically would break them free of being infected with the thinking of white dead European males. Because the idea was, if you're all theories that are dominant today are dominant because people who had superiority colonial complexes imposed their views of the way the world works onto the weaker people, whether it's race or females or whatever, the non-dominant groups. And that's what became, in a sort of Darwinian survival of the fittest fashion, that's what became the dominant systems of thought in the world of the 20th century. Now, it's true that there are bad theories that were input onto us by dominant white European males, right? There were bad white European males, just like there were bad everybody. There were bad women and bad Black people in, Africa who enslaved various other of their own brethren, right? You could find cases of good and Black everything. But their conclusion was, it's specifically Dante, Shakespeare, Mozart, all of these, they're all as equally bad as Hitler's views or any, and so we have to find ways of bringing in theories that are thus relevant, that don't allow people to judge right and wrong, because it's the act of judging right and wrong that causes war. Because obviously Hitler made judgments of what was right or wrong, and we saw the consequences of his judgments, which was war and mass death. So it's the judging that they're saying is bad, the inner standard of thinking that you have a better and a worse that you can standardize or use as a standard to decide what is going to happen. That all had to go. And so the relevant, like, more modernist theories that they promulgated, people like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Erich Fromm, Kurt Lewin, are names who play a prominent role in this matrix of thinking. They basically said, okay, we need people who reflect the ugliness of the world, because the world is ugly, and people have, as to the degree that they believe that the United States was founded on goodness, or that there's good things in their white dead European male writers that they like, to the degree that they think that there's actual nobility there, they're sick, and we have to heal them. So to be healed, you have to be able to accept the ugliness of the world that is. And so that became why you had things like Lord of the Flies that became taught as part of the high school curricula to young malleable people whose ideas were underdeveloped, and they were now being introduced to cynical views of human nature embedded in these stories that were promulgated, like what we saw in Lord of the Flies, or Halden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye, or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, or Fahrenheit 451. But all of these things were then put in, right? Whether you're in Europe or whether you're in Canada or the US, you're now reading these things as a grade 9, grade 10, grade 8 even kid. And when you're going to university, it's even worse. Now you're ripe, having gone through that, to read things like Sartre or Camus, or other cynical people who just really despise humanity, or Nietzsche. They don't like humanity, but that's what they're, and you're feeding off of this stuff, or going into the arts programs or music programs that we talked about our last show. you're now being told, you're conditioned to now accept the ugliness, which you have to respect in modern art, abstract art, which is just as good, you're told, as Rembrandt or Da Vinci. Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko are just as good as Da Vinci and Rembrandt. There's no qualitative difference. You can't judge one is better than the other, or else you're a fascist. And so this stuff, it really messed people up. And
let me interrupt real quick. So critical theory is related to but separate from critical race theory. But why is it called critical theory?
Well, I think it's a Kantian critique of judgment, sort of, right? Like you're criticizing the idea of right and wrong.
Okay. So and how did that, in your perspective, how did that play out into Western, especially, let's say, we had this big fat schism in the 60s. We killed our president, and then we killed his brother. We killed this civil rights leader. We had the Vietnam War going on, and you had the free love contingent of society. How did that play out in that segment of that demographic of our, what was sort of the end game, or at least the middle game, in the 60s and 70s, what you're saying, how we actually saw that practical level?
It took on many forms as far as I've been able to tell, but amongst for anybody who wants to get a sense of it as it actually played out, need only read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World Revisited 10 years later, where Aldous Huxley is talking about the progress that society has actually made after his book was first published, and how impressed he is that, like LSD didn't even exist when I wrote this book. I was calling it Soma, but now look how wonderful this effect is. And look at the type of conditioning of a society which is enthralled with its sensual passions, that he has, everyone is basically living in feelies. Your sensual identity is overriding your thinking all the time so that you love your inner concentration camp without tears, as he calls it. You love it. They could open the door and you could be allowed to be free, but you're like, no, I'd rather stay in there because that's where my drugs and my sex is. So they wanted to figure out a way to bring that into being. And I think when you look at some of the people who followed his theories, who set up things like the Esalen Institute, or who also set up things like Tavistock, like Kurt Lewin, who was also a Frankfurt School follower, who set up group dynamics. And how do you get people to fall in line instead of thinking that they personally have a knowledge of a truth? That is what is an authoritarian personality that has to be shunned and shamed out of existence by the group dynamic pressure that a teacher, otherwise called a facilitator, not a teacher anymore, is directing the students of the group to put pressure and intimidate the creative student, the one that stands out, because they're now a disruptor. So that's something that went into play in the 1960s and 70s heavy. Yeah.
And I saw that personally in Ultimate, to bring this full circle, where the social pressure that's being brought to bear with this spirit of the game, all these rules is saying it's a non-contact sport when it blatantly is, or you can't run with the disc when it is, but you have this hive mind. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is critical theory created a hive mind and killed the individual. And individuals, people who think, who are capable of critical thought, which is the irony of the critical theory, because it killed people who could think critically. It was, to me, it's almost like I saw the worst of humanity, because you can just see how people behave. It was when they think they're doing the right thing and they're pushing down people who are thinking independently. Anyway, back to we can revisit that in 1,000 different directions. Where were we? Highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect among competitors. Adherence to the quote unquote agreed upon rules.
Well, they're the rules, or they're not the rules. Like, who's
But
what is
why?
this?
Why do you? What's uh your profile? You've been profiling the designer of these rules. So what is your profiling mentality? Think that why
Liberal
did they put why did they put that in there?
Um, I get the sense that it's liberal fascism.
It goes back to what you were just saying about Tavistock. Is that it's that group pressure. Well, these are agreed upon,
yeah.
and at the start, I can every ultimate player in the world will agree that the only reason to have rules, penalties in sport is to stop cheating.
Yeah.
No one will agree with that. So no one actually agrees with these rules that it says in the rules they're agreed upon.
I think it's one of those things where it's like it's been a long known observed fact that it's more effective to control people by their will than by force. So a lot of these hypocritical liberal fascists, like people who actually are fascists, but they want to project the image of like loving liberalism. These are like the people who are the founders of today's rule-based liberal international order that tries to virtue signal Russia and China and other uncivilized authoritarian nations for being bad, where it's like, who was doing the regime changing? Who's been the one doing the assassinations and all of this stuff for the past, 80 years?
Election and manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. Like who's doing that? And so I think that when you have that sort of language, like we all agree upon, like, first of all, you didn't get any agreement really, but you're trying to pressure people to all give their acquiescence, thinking that now they'll be more easy to self-control to the degree that they have just given you that acquiescence. But it's like, no, that's not actually how you, if it's true, you should be able to bring somebody to a discovery of something being true without just saying like, we all agree that it's true because everyone who's smart thinks it's true, right?
It's very odd.
Very cultish.
It doesn't, now Ultimate's extremely cultish. A lot of Ultimate players will say, Frank, nobody ever reads this. This is not, that might be ideological, but no one reads that. No one ever takes that seriously. And I would say after 50 years, that zeitgeist is still very much alive, whether or not people read this or not. It's been, once it's been cultish since the 70s.
Yeah.
And that hive mind never died. It's not like those oppressive, I mean, it's very oppressive for sure. When you have a group saying, well, no, objectively, you're wrong. I had a good friend of mine, if we were talking about something about Ultimate, he was a guy I went to Purdue with, and he was out in California. I said, Joe, I don't care if 2 million people think I'm wrong. That doesn't make me wrong. He goes, yes, it does. Like, what, are you kidding?
Well, it's like the old statement goes, right? Like, why don't we all just eat shit? 2 trillion flies can't be wrong. It's like, well,
yeah, right. Okay. Adherence to the agreed upon rules or the basic joy of play.
All right.
Again, I'll do the whole sentence to give it context. Highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect among players. Adherence to the agreed upon rules or the basic joy of play. Nothing's popping out at you.
I mean, I don't know. I'll refrain from commenting on that one.
All right.
I don't know if the game can carry with it basic joy, but I mean, I'd like to think I'm an idealist, Frank, and I like to think that one goes into a sport because it gives them joy. So I'm not offended by that statement.
No, I understand, but the few words before that has agreed upon, which again, in the whole context here, I'm in this oppressive system. I have a different system of play that breaks the game. I've been called for a combination of traveling violations and pick violations over the last 20 years that were completely legal. Okay. Let's say a good 3,000 times.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Within that context of you as an actual person thinking outside the box, trying to follow a higher law, which is not there in the formal rules. Yes, within that liberal fascist structure, I could see why that would be a problematic thing.
Ideological in and of itself. That's a great example of ideological. Well, joy of play, that sounds great, but in the context of the whole thing, it's like, yeah. Protection of these vital elements serve to eliminate unsportsmanlike conduct. That was a quote, the air quote. I'll just read the rest of this because I think you get the idea.
Yeah.
So which is, it's a misguided means of morality as a means of control. From the ultimate field, such actions as taunting opposing players, dangerous aggression, belligerent intimidation, intentional infractions, or other, here we go, win at all costs behavior are contrary to the spirit of the game and must be avoided.
Well, they're definitely boxing their sport into a very specific cage that they want it to be defined by. That's they're not ambiguous about the type of sport they're trying to create.
Okay, so what we have here is what I call the CBGBs.
What's that?
The CBGBs. CBGBs, I call it basically a lot of what we're seeing in liberalism these days. It's collective bargaining grievance brigade. Okay. Feminism. And God, I'm going to get shit thrown at me for this, but it's just an example. There's nothing wrong with feminism. And you look at the definition of feminist. I have this great one. A couple of years ago, they changed it on dictionary.com, sort of the Wikipedia of dictionaries. A couple of years ago, they had feminist, an advocate for the social, economic, and political equality between genders. I'm a feminist.
Yeah, perfect.
Same dictionary. And of course, now it's about 10 times as long. And this is about 5 years ago. Same dictionary, same word, masculinist, 5 years ago. An advocate for the superiority of men. Same motherfucking dictionary. And you're like, what?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, I think when you look at the origins of feminism, it arose. It's been a long-standing thing, right? This yearning to have equal rights, equal access to opportunities for men and women, for genders. That goes back a long ways.
Right.
Is it unfair that it's played out as it has? Sure, it's unfair, and there's been a fight for emancipation of people, of races, and of gender. But going back in the 1940s and 50s, Frederick Douglass, the slave who, he fought for his freedom, he escaped, and he rose to become a leading thought leader in the 1850s, and he became even Lincoln's advisor at a certain point during the Civil War. He worked with suffragette organizations that were working to also free the blacks. And it was part of an idea that we're human beings first, that we all have to fight for a higher human justice and help each other in that common fight. And, Frederick Douglass was helping the suffragettes. The suffragettes were helping the plight of the black slaves. And it had a very strong, there's some really powerful, strong stories. And then it was really only you can see it really turning inside out in the 1960s with the bra burning movement, and things started getting weird, and it became, no, I'm a woman first and a human being not even second. I don't even think of that. It's just your attribute as a human. So you're a white human, a black human, a female human, whatever you are. It's the secondary attribute that became the defining character, and being a human stopped mattering. And all of a sudden you just started seeing otherness everywhere, right? Man is not woman. Blacks are not white.
And we're on to about the fifth revision now. I've heard. I've read where that's an interesting, where they layer it in, the 60s, and then the late 70s, the early 80s, and it just kept. What's the right word? It's not revision, but just. Anyway, so CBGBs, feminism. So feminism, all these things worked because of collective bargaining. The suffragettes, I mean, collective bargaining is you take an underserved, underprivileged, class, and you group them together, and they get a group dynamic gives them more power and strength than they have as individuals. However, today in what we're seeing, we have identity politics, virtue signaling, equity, egalitarianism, equality of outcome, diversity, inclusion, equity. You have people just coalescing into these groups and wielding their power. How do I say this without getting rocks thrown through my window? It seems it's where we started off an hour and a half ago, where you were saying with Pythagorean's theorem, we lost the way back to the original creativity and why we're doing this. And now we just have this formula that we're exploiting the formula because we know it works, but the means to an end of what they're using those formulas for are completely different from what the origination of that.
Yeah, right. This is where you get the idea of the math is racist thing, right? Because people have misused, you could say, in their calculations, different mathematical formulas to build a fortress in Africa for the Spaniards that was going to house slaves that they were going to send off to South America. It's like, yeah, they used math to build the fortress for the slaves. Does that make math the fault of this problem? No, there's something else. Pythagorean's theorem, has been used by bad people and good people for good reasons and bad reasons. Does that make it, the Pythagoras' fault or the formula? No. I would say one thing though on collective bargaining that I would just take issue with the idea of, I know that it certainly has been used by Luen and others who took over the unions and brought a lot of this ideology in the 50s and 60s into unions and used them as a way to sort of shape things in a way that reduced and got rid of the individual for a group dynamic. But originally, looking at the history of collective bargaining in unions, there was a lot of crazy injustice by the Rockefellers and others, JP Morgan interests to destroy and usurp, workers. So it was I think, a good thing, and it could still become a good thing again, in its original fight against imperial structures. But yeah, anything that has power can be corrupted and turned into instruments of the deep state as well. Collective bargaining is no exception to that.
Right, and I use it loosely, because I wanted an acronym to describe all those phenomena, and CBGBs is nice.
Yeah.
And it is being exploited.
Yeah.
And let's take identity politics, for example. How does identity politics work? You identify as a member of an oppressed group, and as such, there has to be an oppressor, and then you can play victim and achieve some political, economic, social gain out of playing victim. And if you ask any psychologist, one of the most diciest syndromes in patients to overcome is victim consciousness. And so it's very difficult for people to take responsibility and to get to a place of empowerment.
Yeah.
And so these people who are using large scale identity politics for some political, economic, social gain are doing just this tremendous disservice to all those people who are latching on to this victim consciousness, because they don't know any better, because every one of these phenomena where there is some imbalance, and you can't, this right here, you can never attempt to artificially level the playing field. It just doesn't work. It never has worked. I don't think it ever will work. Time and time again, we see in history, it fails because there's always people in there who are there's always jacks. There's always people in there who are subversives, who are going to exploit this to their own means. It always happens. So identity politics, you identify as oppressed group, and you have to identify an oppressor, and to get some leverage, some gain. So and you're probably not going to get this because this has been going on for 2 hours, but where's the identity politics in what I just read you? Because it's there in black and white, and blue and red and green. Should I read the whole thing to you again? And I'm not sure if you'd still get it.
No, I don't think I have time for that.
I'll read this last sentence, and you can see if you find it. Such actions as taunting opposing players, dangerous aggression, belligerent intimidation, intentional infractions, or other win-at-all-cost behavior are contrary to the spirit of the game.
I mean, I think that they're definitely trying to. I don't know if this answers your question. That they're certainly trying to intimidate anybody who has access to a sense of believing in truth or improvement, or and they definitely want to enhance the those who are inclined to want to just fit in to a herd, or just have their emotions respected without actually having to think for themselves. I think that's definitely favors those people more than the right.
But there's a so I actually am the oppressor. Right?
Yeah,
I am not.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Yeah.
Okay. But it's right here. But I'm not it. The oppressor in Ultimate Frisbee is the win at all costs athlete. It's a boogeyman. It's the guy who cheats win at all costs. You do whatever it takes to win. But in the context of the way this entire ideological treatise has been presented, and especially, I don't know if you've ever heard of the New Games movement that started in the 60s and the 70s. If you really, that to me is sort of the bridge between critical theory and Ultimate Frisbee.
Yeah, you sent me the link to that. That came out of the Esalen Institute, right? Where people have this like big ball that's painted like the earth that they're in two teams. And they have to sort of like roll it up to,
right.
Was it a peak or something? And
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what happens.
The new game,
periodically, different people have to like just change teams to be on the opposing team and just keep the ball from like falling off the mountaintop or something.
The new games were meant to be fun and fair for all participants, irrespective of ability, age, gender, race, everything. They leveled the playing field. And members of that community always considered Ultimate Frisbee to be the most successful new game ever. I mean, New Games is disgusting to me. I mean, it goes against every fiber of my being. I want to compete. I want to compete against this and try to figure out how to get in the zone, how to perform at my highest on a canvas that allows me to be creative and artistic and dance.
Yeah.
And New Games destroy. It's just like everything about New Games takes that away from me. Does that make me a bad person? No, I'm just an athlete who wants to compete. So the winner, and if you look at the rhetoric of and the person who wrote this, by the way, in 1975, Dan Stork-Roddick is probably in the Ultimate Frisbee Hall of Fame. Was, I don't want to say he was a card carrying member, but he's quoted in their books, and he's quoted like they know each other, and he was somehow involved with them.
But he was a card carrying member of what?
Well, I'm saying there was no card carrying.
Oh no, but he was involved with who, the Esalen or something else?
Just the New Games people.
Oh, okay.
There was cross pollination between Dan Roddick and the New Games people.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
it's in the literature.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you read the New Games literature, the win at all costs athlete was. It's sort of like what you're saying with Pythagoras and these things like this. It's a boogeyman.
Yeah, and I think that for me, coming not from a sports, but rather, I mean, we more of an illustration, artistic sort of background that I'm coming from. I saw that same thing when I was taking a couple of years of fine arts after illustration, and there's this encouragement to just express yourself from the beginning. Just express yourself in ways that might be kind of interesting, but there's no building on the foundations of past great benchmarks of artistic history. So you're not relearning, you're not learning from the masters who made these wonderful penetrating breakthroughs in chiaroscuro, in all sorts of properties of expressing nature. You don't learn any of that. They just talk about it a little bit in art history. Then you just jump onto like splattering paint or whatever. And it cherishes and rewards mediocrity. And anybody who tries to express,
you just described you know ultimate frisbee better than any ultimate player does.
Do, eh?
That's exactly. It's
but you see, it infected everything. Nothing is untouched by this. Whether you'll see this for those who've been through science, or arts or sports. It's infected every part of our lives. Mediocrity.
This is correct, and this is why Ultimate's an interesting case study. But it's so mediocre that you can't turn it on and see how mediocre it is.
Yeah.
Fuck, man. So after we cure this, when we fix this mediocrity syndrome, we'll head off and do nuclear fusion, and then maybe cure cancer. And I mean, what do we do about it? Like it's infected everything. Do we track it back to does it all go back to the Frankfurt School? And if it does, how do we uproot it, or what? Can we just shine light on it?
Well, I think that definitely before you can really begin to do anything serious about it, you have to first diagnose it within yourself, because we're all in various degrees born into this already sick system that had these permeations. And so, like it or not, on some level, conscious or unconscious, there are things that are withholding our ability to tap into our higher faculties, our creative reason, these other things that have been diminished in force. There's so many discoveries, though. You just, anybody looking online will find that there's amazing schools and breakthroughs in cancer research that are outside of the mainstream sort of priesthood controlling the levers of funding to what is acceptable, methodology of teaching and practice in pharmaceutical, or in medicine. Same thing for energy. I mean, there's so many breakthroughs that have already been made that we're just not even told about. And I think that politically, there's a lot of barriers that are being artificially jammed into the machine to keep these things from being unleashed. On the other hand, that's just what already exists. There's things that are beyond people's imagination that are already available in many ways. If you could just get that political will to change, that's not I don't have an answer to that. On the other hand, there's breakthroughs that we still should have made years ago that we haven't, because people have been crippled spiritually, emotionally, that they have to heal themselves from as well, so that they could make those discoveries in the arts, in science, and other things. And that requires doing work. We got to take our education into our own hands in many ways, because you're not going to get it in the institutions. So having, programs like what you're doing, what I'm trying to do with the Rising Tide Foundation with my wife, and our seminars and astronomy work that we're doing for students, these are ways that we have to sort of capture and create a proper curriculum that we should have had access to, but we didn't, because we live in this oligarchically managed society. So there's ways like that. But we definitely have to take responsibility for ourselves. That's for sure. For our own minds.
How much more time do you have?
I'm already over. I'm sorry. Okay. I can do 5 more minutes.
All right. Five more minutes. And maybe we can springboard this.
Okay.
So taking everything you just said and dovetailing it with most of my work, I blame science. And science, and like I said earlier, atheism is untenable, and yet our current framework in science is a form of institutionalized atheism, and it's a substratum underneath all of this, and that has resulted in all this. That the first, and I said this in the last video, the framework we have in science started in the same decade as Marxism, and that's not a coincidence. And so I think we fix science, and we can fix everything else. That sounds grandiose and hyperbolic and God knows what else, but it just seems to me it's very ripe. It's like, wait a second, is it possible that we're 180 years overdue for a major course correction in science? Mm-hmm. And can we look at that?
I think that's a good point. And part of the problem part of the corruption in science that's been permitted to permeate has been caused in no small measure by the acceptance of becoming a go-nowhere consumer society back in late 60s, early 70s, when the dollar was floated onto the floating exchange rates. And we became what was celebrated by some networks as the post-industrial society. They were like, the former wisdom was that, you had to have industrial production and growth and big projects to give, vitality to money. No longer is that the case. Now we can just consume, have, export our industries to, people in dirty lands that we don't have to look at, who stay poor, to send our things we used to make ourselves back to our dollaramas. And that will be the new wisdom. And I think that now it's been over 40, 50 years even of that type of stagnation where, because we don't do anything, we don't test our ideas. And so crappy standard model theories of the atom, or all sorts of just theories that might look nice on a computer screen, and they're like maybe logically consistent with themselves, but they have no bearing in reality. If you try to apply those theories, it doesn't work. You can't even test out string theory. There's how many, like 11 different, models of it. You can't test one as being more right than the other. It's all just, so I think if you start doing things again and actually saying, okay, we have, like we used to before I was born, I've read books that showed me that society used to have, people would have a vision of the future state that you want to do. You don't know how you're going to get there, but you're like, we have to green this desert or whatever. And then you figure it out along the way. And then as you're figuring it out, you're testing your thoughts out, and things you very quickly get to see what's crappy that doesn't work. And then you get to reevaluate, well, what's a better theory that does the job, whether it's asteroid defense, whether it's terraforming another planet, even in, the next century or whatever. Like there's so many things to do. And for me, what gives me hope is the multipolar approach, because currently you have a clash of the unipolar doctrine of, NATO, the rules-based order, all this crap that's atrophying. And then you have this multipolar alliance in defensive nation states with Russia, China, other nations with the Belt and Road Initiative, all building big things for, 30, 40, 50-year projects in the future. That gives me a lot of hope, because that orientation will help you filter out quickly shitty ideas that don't work, that might, be popular but are still not true, versus unpopular fringe ideas that do the job, that you quickly discover, okay, we got to go in that direction instead. And you might discover that atheism is not actually part or compatible with real science if you do that.
Well, I hope so. It's not a coincidence that science, we're based on scientific materialism, and society is inherently materialistic. And we can kill all that with our next episode, whenever you want to come back on with me. This has been phenomenal. Thanks for humoring me in my egotistical vent on Ultimate, although this was very academic, and I hope some people got something out of it, because it was very cool.
Yeah, I had fun. I learned a lot about Ultimate Frisbee that I never thought I would know about. And I hope that people watching also realize that they've been tricked into discovering some major philosophical ideas that they might not have otherwise thought about too. Ha!
All right, buddy. Thanks again.